With the vocabulary connection stratagem, we're going to be using the same DVT that we used earlier when we were pre-teaching vocabulary, only now we'll be using it during the reading of the story. So as we are encountering specific terms in the story, we will be adding the definitions and connections to that DVT. So one of your instructional resources for this stratagem is the PowerPoint version of the DVT, and it's actually 3 slides. So what we've done is we've added 5 words there that we have pre-selected that we think are important to teach. But you'll notice at the bottom of this slide, there's a blank place, and what we'll be doing there is students will be selecting additional terms from the story that they think are pretty interesting terms, and we will be unpacking the definitions and connections associated with those as well. So I'm going to take a moment to just quickly review how the vocabulary connections DVT works, and we'll start with this first term, cosmopolite. And so the first thing we address is the bigger picture. A cosmopolite is a type of person, so that's the bigger picture, and it's a noun. And then we focus on the distinctive features. So if you remember, many definitions actually have multiple components or parts, and each of those being a distinctive element to the definition. And we found that if you list each of those elements or features on a separate line, that really helps students focus on all of the features of a definition. So for an example, for a cosmopolite, type of person who is well-traveled, worldly in views, and sophisticated. The next component are related words. Now, this can be synonyms, or they could actually be antonyms or any other words that students think of that relates to cosmopolite in some way. So, for an example, city slicker or sophisticated or metropolitan are all words related to cosmopolite. Real-life connections are things from students' background knowledge or experiences from real life that they can make a connection with. So, for an example, for cosmopolite, my grandmother is a real cosmopolite because she lived all over the world. Her favorite cities are New York, Paris, and Hong Kong. I spy the term is basically how the term was used in text. And for now, we're just going to list the sentence in which the term appears in the story. Later on, in other modules, we'll be doing some other things with I spy the term that's a little more sophisticated. Rainsford thought Zaroff was a true cosmopolite because Zaroff was serving champagne and used fancy silver at the dinner table. Remember, this is something that we're using during instruction. So when you're using this stratagem with students and you're unpacking new vocabulary, it's important to review the DVT with students and discuss the prompts on it. Now, they'll be familiar with it because you've used it earlier when you were pre-teaching vocabulary, but it's always a good idea to just quickly review the elements of the DVT and what they're all about. Then when you're using the text to notes to elaboration process, we're going to be using this during the reading of the story. What will happen is we'll be reading the story until one of the targeted terms is encountered, and then we'll pause the reading and with the class discuss the term's definition and be providing some guided note-taking on the vocabulary connections DVT. And then we're going to repeat that process as we continue reading and encounter other targeted terms. Another thing that we'll be doing as we're reading is we will ask students or teams of students to find and identify 2 additional terms from the story that they think are pretty compelling or interesting or weird or whatever to add to the vocabulary connections DVT. They'll be identifying terms, and some examples are cannabis, vitality, opaqueness, vigor, and so forth. If necessary, you may need to provide a short list of 3 or 4 terms from which students can choose. Now, I prefer for them to just spot a term that they think is pretty cool or interesting, but sometimes you'll have to just provide a list and have students choose from the list. So then what you'll be doing is facilitating note-taking about the term's definitions, connections, etc. Then in the second part of this, now notice we're into the after stage now, so this is the end of the lesson. We shift from text to notes, now we're going from notes to elaboration. What you'll be doing is asking student pairs to use their DVT notes as a guide as they practice explaining the definitions and connections to their peers. Likewise, we want to do a turn and talk so that students can discuss responses to the essential questions. We provided a couple. For an example, would this DVT be useful when taking notes and studying terms for science or history courses? Why or why not? Or how would you change it to make it better? Now, students can respond to both questions, or you can allow them to choose one or the other.